topic, Dom, shoot.
Topic, yes, I have one. A topic, yes. All right. So the question is at its core very simple, but there's a couple parts to it to consider. So the question is, what do you value most in a video game? What is most important to you when you're judging, or playing a game? Now it's more than that though. So it's not just what's the most important, but it's where do you rank, the three, four, or five things that you think are, that are a part of this question.
Got you.
What percent of the pie do they each deserve, right?
Okay.
So, for example, for me, I think it's got to be there's three pieces, 33% each, evenly split. One is gameplay, because it's got to play right. It's got to be fun to actually play the game. The loop has to be fun to do. After that, story. I love games with a good story. Like Assassin's Creed Syndicate that I played, the story just didn't really grab me. The gameplay was there once I kind of got used to the movement, and then the aesthetics were there. So, but the story was just kind of some of the side characters were cool to play around with, but for the most part, that's kind of where that ranked. And then the third pillar is visuals and performance, and that's kind of a combination. It's not just like, well, this game is the highest resolution or it has the most detail. It's a combination of art style, frame rate, fluidity, graphic detail, whatever it is that can make it look good. So, for example, like Journey looked amazing on my TV, right? Yeah. It's only a couple colors and a couple shapes, and that's it. But like the art style and everything they did combined to make the presentation, that's what I'd call it, is the presentation is just phenomenal. Whereas Uncharted 4 has a phenomenal presentation in a different manner. So like their Naughty Dog's blend of the cinematic cutscenes and those elements into gameplay kind of adds to that presentation for me. So that's for me the three things, all evenly split: gameplay, story, and presentation is what I'll call it. So for me, they're all even. They're all equally important to me, and I couldn't pick one over the other. The way they interact is different for each game. If one game has such a phenomenal story, but the gameplay is a little weak, then they can be forgiven, right? They can balance each other out to some extent. But obviously, you want all three to be as high as you can. So, I'm curious what is. I'm anticipating that Jordan might put a little bit higher emphasis on gameplay than I did, but curious what you guys think.
Would you like to go first, Jordan, or would you like me to go first?
Okay. Sure, I will. Yeah. So. I think we're all going to have different opinions here, which is going to be cool. But, yeah, so if we're breaking down... Also, I think you meant to say gameplay, presentation, and performance, not gameplay, story, and presentation, right? Dom?
Yeah, gameplay,
to me, presentation is the story, the art style, all that stuff.
Right.
Yeah, and gameplay is design, mechanics.
It sounded like, from what you were saying earlier, I think you just misspoke. I may be wrong, but I just wanted to make sure.
We know what you mean. We got you.
Yeah, I got you. Just in case anybody out there was confused. Anyways, for me, if we're going to break it down to percentage, I'm going to go with 50% gameplay, and then we have 30% performance, and then 20% presentation, story, whatever you want to call it. The reason being is because I feel like those are the most important parts of a video game in that order. One being gameplay. If you can't see a movie, then it's not going to be a good movie. If you can't hear a movie, then it's not going to be a good movie. If you open up a book and it's so poorly printed that half of the words are like blotched out, then you're not going to enjoy the book. And so for me, the logistics always have to be there. Whatever the medium of entertainment that you're going into is, it has certain logistics that it has to tackle first and foremost in order to even aspire to greatness in the first place. So for me, Uncharted, any of the 4 Uncharted games, can't even come close to being a great game because they don't get the fundamentals down correctly. If you're a football player, for example, and you're a wide receiver who doesn't know how to catch the ball, but you're fast as hell once you get it in your hands, you're still not going to be much use to anybody.
You're not going to be in the NFL.
You're not going to be in the NFL, but let's say you somehow stumbled in there, right? You got some cool highlight reels and somebody thought you were a good-looking dude, so they decided to draft you, whatever. Yeah, you can outrun every single person. You know, let's say that's your story or your presentation. You can outrun everybody once you get the ball in your hands, but you're such a butterfinger that you can't even catch the ball in the first place. So it's like, well, you're not going to score us any touchdowns because you're always going to be dropping passes. And
Yeah, well, consider that sometimes the good parts that something brings can outweigh the bad. So, for example, and we're going to keep going with this sports thing, I guess. The Detroit Lions have a running back, Amir Abdullah. He fumbles like all the goddamn time.
Yeah.
He just fumbles. It's irritating, right? And it costs us turnovers, and it's bad. But it's worth it to have him on the squad because when he doesn't fumble, he gets yards, and it weighs out his
He's net
negatives,
positive,
I guess.
yeah.
But see, I totally
Right.
disagree with you there because let's say he scores 10 touchdowns. Let's say in one game he scores 3 touchdowns, right? But he fumbles twice, and on one of those fumbles, the team gets the ball and scores.
Takes the lead.
Yeah, well, let's just say they score a touchdown. Well, one of his touchdowns is taken away because it technically doesn't count. It's canceled out.
But they're still winning.
They're still winning. That's besides.
Let's get off
Yeah,
with
exactly.
the football metaphor.
Yeah.
I don't think
No,
a lot
I
of
think
people
that
just
makes a
like
lot of
football.
sense for this particular situation. Yeah, if he's constantly fumbling the ball, hell, I don't want him on my team because there's people that can score a lot of touchdowns that aren't constantly fumbling. So if we're
if there's something that does both, obviously that's better.
Yeah.
Right, and I think that there are so many games out there, Dom, that it's almost, like I've mentioned before, I think it is kind of insulting to your CD Projekt Reds, to your Machine Games, to your Studio Japan's not Team Eco, to your Sony Santa Monica's, to your Sony Sucker Punches. Sucker Punch can do all of the stuff that Naughty Dog does. Now, the story isn't as good, but the gameplay is way better. But the story is way better than Uncharted's gameplay, if that makes sense. They still have all of the things, and they're still doing all of the things good, whereas Uncharted's gameplay is sometimes dog shit bad, and sometimes it's totally serviceable. But that doesn't matter because of the times where it's so dog shit bad, drag it down. And when you talk about, well, this is good, but this part's bad, and it balances out. For me, that's not how I look at it, especially in video games. See, video games as a form of media entertainment are the culmination of visuals and of storytelling and of gameplay and of music. They have everything that you could think of in media and entertainment combined into one. And if any of those things are out of balance, then it really messes up that game being great. So there are so many choices, like I said, that are nailing everything. Witcher 3 nails gameplay, story, presentation, performance. It nails everything. So then when you say, oh, but this game has a great story but plays like shit, but it balances out. I'm not trying to mock you. That kind of sounded like I was, but I'm not. But just to that point, it's like, well, there's plenty of other games that have great stories and are actually fun to fucking play.
So think of it this way. Consider Telltale games. Their gameplay is crap.
Oh, yeah.
Right? I mean, it's quick time events.
Keeps those games from being great. So, like, I came on the podcast and said that Game of Thrones is one of the best video game stories I have ever played, if not the best. Yet it looks so fucking terrible and it plays so roughly that game is not great as a whole. That is not a great game. It's a good game, in my opinion. You can't get to greatness if you don't have all your ducks in a row, You're not going to have a car that you think is, like my Toyota Camry that's been running for like 17 years now, is a great car because it hits on all the cylinders, pun intended. If it was a car that was great, but, after 5 years of owning the car, the radio just doesn't work anymore. Well, fuck that car. That's not a great car. It's just a decent car,
We're going a little long, so I'll be quick on mine. So the way I have it listed, and you're right, ours are different. For me, top is 40%. I would give it to story. To me, I'm not a huge movie goer, so I love getting story through video games, and I think that's obviously been a lot easier of a thing to do over the last 5 to 7 years in video games as we actually, people have started caring about the stories in video games. Second to me, 35% would be gameplay. That's design, that's mechanics, that's fluidity, that's everything, obviously, with gameplay. To me, personally, I've played, and the reason story is so important to me is I've played plenty of games that feel right and play right, and that's hitting on gameplay and performance, but I just don't care. If I wanted to do that, I'd play a mobile game. You know, like I need to have story there as well, and that's why story is so critical to me. That's the number one most important thing in a video game to me. And you know, games that don't necessarily have a great story but have good gameplay and performance, those have their reasons too.
See, that's why it was low on my end. I was going to ask you like about Spelunky. You love that game, right? And it doesn't have a story.
No, it doesn't have a story, but the gameplay is so good it makes up for it. So there are exceptions to this. This is a very generalized way of looking at how we specifically like to enjoy games. So yeah, 40% story, 35% gameplay, 25% performance. Do I want my games to run like garbage? No. But in the overall scheme of things, like you said, some of my favorite experiences in video games, the games didn't necessarily run fairly well. One of my favorite experiences this year, Fallout 4. Game doesn't run necessarily entirely well, you know, on the console space, but I love Fallout 4. You know, the Telltale games, they don't run very well, but I love Walking Dead Season 1. And this kind of goes to like movies in the sense of like there's plenty of movies that look very pretty, but are terrible movies. The Transformer movies, those are actually like to the eye, they're very great looking. They're very beautiful films. They're shot very beautifully, right? Just from an aesthetic point of view. But the movie is terrible. There's no story. The actual pacing of the movies, not all of that's awful. But the movie
style
looks
over
pretty.
substance.
Exactly. The movie looks pretty. Okay, cool. Like one of my favorite movies I've seen this year is Room, and that movie doesn't necessarily look very. It's shot well, but it doesn't look very well. Like it's not shot on super high res cameras or anything. It takes place in a room, but the story is so enriching and so powerful. So I'm not gonna take too long on this. 40% story, 35% gameplay, and 25% performance, I guess. So that's how I would see it. Anything else you want to close your topic off with, Dom, before we head out to the next one?
No, I like it. I like the different pie charts we each gave.
I was going to say, just to reiterate one of my points, it's okay that Uncharted or The Last of Us doesn't have awesome gameplay, but to me, like I said, it just can't be a great game unless it has all that stuff. Unless it's like Spelunky, where it's saying, look, story isn't a thing in this game. We're just going to focus on the gameplay, and we're only going to do that. If it had tried to do a story and then was like then it'd be different, you know.
I'd rather have no story than a poorly tried one.
Exactly. 100%. Know what your strengths are, you know.
Exactly.